Well, this is an Orion 03, sitting here at the Air Force Museum, actually awaiting final assembly. Just spent a couple of weeks putting the wings on, which was done by Airbus coming down from Woodburn. That's been their task.
This airplane's probably the best airplane I've flown, I think. It was built as a pilot's aeroplane. It would turn on a 6-bitty bit. You could pull 3G in it.
You felt almost unworthy of wielding the capability of the Orion.
It was a purely beautiful aircraft to fly.
They've performed a really important service in not only protecting our economic borders, but saving countless lives in air-sea rescue.
The one photo I have in my logbook is 03. I couldn't think of a better airframe to have here. It's got the most hours of all New Zealand P-3s, and it has served us well.
Fixed wing flying in the Air Force has really been the Herc and the Orion, so to have a piece that is so representative of a significant era of the Air Force is huge. For me, joining the Air Force, my goal was to make it to the Orion. I kind of saw the Orion as offering such variety in the roles that it does, anything from search and rescue, which is some of the most rewarding work that you get to do in the Orion, but also the combat capabilities that it holds. And it was a very varied role, and that was quite attractive.
Number 5 Squadron's Lockheed Orion aircraft are tailor-made for maritime surveillance. New Zealand industry has refitted the aircraft with some of the most modern detection equipment in the world.
We had this amalgamation of what was a fairly rugged warhorse on the outside with a really sophisticated system in the back. Up front, it still felt like you were throwing around the 1960s airplane that it was.
In late 65, early 66, the Air Force was embarking on a major upgrade program. We were still flying essentially Second World War aircraft. I was on 5 Squadron. I was flying in the Sunderland flying boat at the time.
In a matter of minutes, the Sunderland is off the deck and on its way to a very small island in a very large ocean.
While the Sunderland had spent a long time in the air, it was painfully slow. New Zealand's maritime responsibilities extend north of the equator and down to the South Pole. We're actually responsible for a vast amount of ocean in terms of search and rescue, for monitoring what's going on in those areas.
The leading submarine power in the world today has many of these and is building more.
The Cold War was really warming up. The Soviet Union at the time had a huge submarine fleet, and we needed some way of keeping tabs on that. So we needed an aircraft that also had a capability to find and track the generations of submarines that were there at the time. We needed an aircraft that could do that, and the decision had been made that we would purchase 5 Orions. The first thing we did was head off to San Diego, where we went to anti-submarine warfare school. We then did a week of instrument flying, and then we moved back up to Moffett Field, and that's where we actually started the flying training. That was a real experience. So I get in this Orion, taxi to the end of the runway, and the pilot who was in the right-hand seat, the American, said, go. So set max power, and off we went. And my brain was still sitting on the tarmac, and we were airborne, and we were airborne at 115 knots, rotate. We were at the cruise speed of a Sunderland on liftoff, and this thing just continued to accelerate. And I was just ended up so far behind this aeroplane that, I was still trying to sort out getting the gear up when we were sort of halfway downwind. And so I have to say, I did not cover myself in glory on my first ever trip in the Orion. I just had to speed up the work rate to be able to cope with this thing that just, at training weights, would just, it was amazing. It was powered by 4 Detroit Diesel, which was the parent company, Allison, which was the maker of the engines, T56 turboprop engines.
turboprop environment gives you instant power both ways to stop you accelerating too much or to accelerate if you need it.
They produce about 5,200 shaft horsepower each, but the aircraft mountings are only capable of absorbing 4,600. You had an absolute excess of power. There was even a graph in the NATOPS manual for flying on one engine, so they'll give you some idea of what this aircraft was capable of.
It's robust, it'll take a hell of a lot of punishment. When we used to go around to Antarctica and do deep south patrols and around the Roaring Forge and that sort of stuff, traditionally we put about, I think it was about 9 or 12 counts average on a flight on our G meters and that sort of thing. We put 2,000 counts on it.
It's very tactile, very hands and feet driven. You can really feel what you're asking the airplane to do, and that's quite a nice feeling as a pilot.
It was fast, so we could do over 400 knots. We could accelerate very quickly. We could out-accelerate an A4. So it was an incredibly capable aircraft.
Getting it off the planet wasn't the hardest bit. Putting it back on wasn't so much fun. Something like 80% of the wing is swept by the prop wash, so you needed quite a bit of coordination between thrust reduction and pitch control to put it back on, and it wasn't the most forgiving airplane to put back on. Luckily, you had plenty of advice from the other 10 guys on the crew about how to do it.
In the front, there is a massive radar and a similar one in the rear underneath the mad boom. So these two radars operated in sync with each other. So as far as their radar operator was concerned, he just saw one sweep go round.
Mad boom, magnetic anomaly detector. It can detect a submarine under the water. That lives inside of the tail there, often referred to as the stinger. It has to be right at the back of the aircraft so that the aircraft's magnetic field doesn't influence it when it's hunting out there and looking for steel or ferrous ions below the sea.
Back in 1966, submarines were mostly conventional submarines. They ran diesels, and when they would start a diesel, we could hear that for 60 miles. So we could surveil an extensive patch of water with listening devices.
Here's the bomb bay for the Orion, and it starts at this point here and stretches right back to here. When it flies with the bomb bay open, it makes a lovely howling sound too. I still love that on beat-ups and flybys.
The lower rack would be fitted with like 4 depth charges. The idea was to get 2 relatively close to a submarine, and the underwater shock would be enough to split them in half, or at least knock his instruments out completely such that he could no longer do his job. The upper rack carried torpedoes, and these were homing torpedoes. Quite apart from its war load, we also carried life-saving equipment in the bomb bay. We could throw medical supplies and all sorts of things out the back door, which we did routinely.
It really took the whole crew complement to actually put together a successful outcome on the P3. It wasn't just a couple of bus drivers and then a few people running some sensors down the back. It relied on the cohesion to get a huge amount out of it, even just flying it, let alone operating it.
So here we can see NZ4203 is mentioned as one of the aircraft involved in the Queen's Birthday rescue of 1994.
Queen's Birthday weekend is the characteristic weekend where the fleet leaves from New Zealand to head up to the islands for the season. The development of this bomb was quite sudden. Unfortunately, this thing moved in a way which wasn't predictable, moved down on top of the fleet in a way which no one could predict.
The swathe of the storm was quite narrow. It just picked up probably about 7 or 8 boats.
There was a breaking sea. It hit us and picked the boat up and rolled us down and dismasted us. We went upside down 30 times.
Flew across the first boat about 4 times before I could see it. It was blowing probably about 90 knots. Sea state was in excess of 12. At that stage, we knew then that there's very little chance of my life was going to get to them in a hurry. So we sort of just provided emotional support to the lady called Paula. Got pretty hectic.
Who do I call? Over. You can call us anything you want. My name is Bruce, or Mike is my tactical coordinator at the back, or you can just call us Kiwi or whatever you like.
There were 2 or 3 other boats by that stage in considerable trouble, and we're trying to look for a boat called Quartermaster, which we couldn't find. And then we went and found Quartermaster's life raft and had a look at that and realised it was empty.
Yeah, options started to run out. That's when the discussion was had amongst us. Well, EPIRB, we've got an EPIRB. Or would there be a response? We really didn't know. We had no idea. And for that Orion to, for those guys to be on board and turn up there and checking on us, that was pretty important to our mindset at the time.
And the thing with this is that everyone, apart from the pilot, sits sideways down the back.
Right.
So it's like sitting in a cold coffin rolling around them. So they were pretty unwell boys down the back.
Oh, were they?
Oh, yeah.
I never realised the number of crew that were on board those planes. So there's a lot of people putting their lives on the line, to come out and help us.
So here we've got the commanding officer's comments at the time. It was remarkable that 21 people were rescued and only 3 lives were lost.
I certainly wouldn't have a jet in the environment we put that in. It gives you lots of options in terms of high level, low level, and endurance.
A few years ago now, the P-8 Poseidon was selected to replace the Orion. I think it's certainly been a big change going to an aeroplane that you don't have to fold the stairs out yourself. You don't have a big deep fryer down the back, but you also don't have ashtrays and you don't have pencil sharpeners and you have a flushing toilet. So there's quite a bit of technological advancement along the way. I got along to the retirement dinner. Everyone shared the same sentiment, and it's hard to understand how people can be so emotionally attached to a flying hunk of metal, but carried a lot of people together, brought a lot of people together and saved a few lives along the way.
What's it like being reunited again with it?
Oh, it's so lovely actually. I love to see it back here now. Beautiful aircraft, deserves to be here, this particular one as well. We've got a 56-year-old airframe here and it's still in remarkably nice condition. I love to see that, that's for sure.
I don't think anyone could have estimated just how many lives it would impact, not only in a search and rescue context, but also all of the jobs that it does for New Zealand, fisheries, customs, holding that kind of redundant combat capability as well. I don't think anyone would have thought you'd get as much out of it as you have as a capability, yeah.